Welcome to this episode of the Personal Development Podcast with Paola Castro and Michael J. Emery.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Personal Development Podcast. I am Paola Castro.
And I'm Michael Emery.
So we are so excited to bring to you episode number 2. And we are doing this as an experiment, and we had so much fun in our first episode. And in this one, we have decided to start setting the tone, setting the feeling tone of making this time together, this podcast, a sacred space, a space for you to reconnect with yourself, to do some self-reflection. So I'm going to invite us all to close our eyes for a moment. If you want, you don't have to do it, but I like to start with my breath. So I invite you to take a deep breath in your nose and exhale out the mouth. Very good. Let's do it 2 more times. Inhale and let go out the mouth. One more time, inhale. And let go out the mouth. Very good. With your eyes closed and taking deep breaths, breathe in slow and deep. In this moment, we just give ourselves permission to be here right now in the present moment, letting go of what's been going on in our lives and letting go of the temptation to know about the future. As we give ourselves permission to be right here, right now, we tune in with our breath, knowing that what we're about to discuss is exactly what we need to say, knowing that we're being guided by the wisdom of the living spirit of this universe. And we know that it's no mistake that we're listening, that we are right here, right now in this podcast. So we're going to take the last deep breath in. And as we let go, we are ready to begin, so we can open our eyes. Mm-hmm.
Excellent. Excelente.
Excelente. So what's today's topic, Mike?
Today's topic is the individual. So last week we talked about individual, the process of individuation. And we explored the hero's journey. We explored the 10 ox herding wood prints. And then we also talked about the personal development map, which is something that I created. And it's just kind of an outline of potential experiences and formations of who we are, what our identity becomes. But I thought that it would be really important today to talk about the individual. And there's a future topic that I want to talk about, which is individualism, and then being individualistic, and then the individual versus the collective or collectivism, which is a really important topic. But I want to kind of warm up first and make sure that we're all on the same page and we've got an idea in terms of what's being discussed. So I wanted to share just a moment here, make sure that you can see this document. Can you see this?
I can see it. Mm-hmm.
Perfect. So just a quick recap. So we talked about, the personal development path, how our identity is formed out of our past experiences, our paradigm, health, wealth, relationship experiences, human needs, social norms, significant emotional events, the things that were formative, both positive and negative, and then how those created what we understand to be our values and beliefs, which are essentially like our operating system. They're functioning in the back of our minds. And then the illusory part, the part that we want to, I guess when we're working with coaching clients, people are always bumping up against their paradigm. So it's like what they believe to be real or possible or true for them, but they want something that's greater than that. So they've got to change something within their paradigm that allows them to experience their ideal lifestyle, their ideal experiences, their ideal emotions, and then do something that's important with their life, like they have a primary life focus or an area or purpose that they're channeling all of their energy into. And we also talked about the 10 ox herding wood prints and how the spiritual development path, from my perspective, parallels the personal development path. It goes from this process of not knowing essentially not, you don't know what you don't know. And going along this process of defining who you are, integrating the aspects of yourself, kind of like your animal nature, and going through that struggle, and then becoming one with who you are, and you're becoming one with your body, but then also becoming one with your unconscious mind. And I think that's something that we do in hypnosis training. It's a process. It's actually part of healing the inner child too, where we have this like a hologram or a mental representation of who we are at various stages in our lives, and all of us have this. It's a concept. I mean, it's not. I'm not saying it's like an actual thing that exists, but it's a part of our psyche, a part of our mind, where there's this inner child that we have that's kind of like this part that needs nurturing. It needs to be safe and protected. And so when we go and we integrate that inner part, it gives us so many different abilities to be strong, to be powerful, to be proactive in the external world. And
can I say something about that?
Absolutely.
I love that. And I learned that from you. So I just want to say that, and I'm so grateful for you and our friendship. So Michael was the first person that told me about coaching, personal development about 13 years ago. So we've been friends for a long time. And so in this path, one of the things I've learned from you is about the inner child. And whenever I'm encountering someone that wants to do all these great things, all of these great changes and transformation, they go to retreats and they go to the seminars and they read the books and they hire me as a coach and we do work. And sometimes I just see the cycle of self-sabotage happening over and over again. Sometimes, they have these grandiose ideas and they're beautiful. But then when I see them, that there's something right there that is not letting them go through, or when fear creeps in, every time I bring them back to the inner child. And so to integrate that part, because the adult you is ready to do all of these changes. The adult you, it's like, okay, I'm the hero. I'm going to say yes to the call. But if that little girl, that little boy is scared, and that part of your brain, trapped in time, then it's going to be a lot more struggle to move forward. And what I've seen in my life and in the life of those that I have guided through this process is, yes, just exactly what you said. It's a level of empowerment, because that part of you feels safe. It is okay to do this work. I am protected. I am nurtured by the adult part of me. And I know that at any given moment I get scared, or I am uncertain, or I feel like I'm not being heard, or I'm not being seen, that, the mature part of ourselves can go and nurture that part that feels that way. And it always works and gets people out of a funk or out of the rabbit hole. And so that I just wanted to add that to that part that is brilliant. So it's part of the integration of self.
Yeah, it's so important, and it is especially relevant. Most of us, we suffer from too little or too much in terms of the feminine or masculine energies that are present during our childhoods. And so I would say it's either an excess or it's a lack of nurture, which is a feminine property or feminine element that should typically, comes from the mother, or it's a lack of protection, which comes from the father. So there's either, it's overprotectiveness or not enough protection. And I think that's a really relevant point, especially in this day and age when I'd say more than half the families out there don't have a father figure in them. So it's, you get that internal sense where your inner child per se doesn't feel secure. They might have enough nurture. And actually that's what I see a lot of right now, especially in men in our generation, is that we've been over nurtured. And women have had to, because of the lack of the father in the household, women have had to develop that sense of self-protection. So they're more masculine in many senses than some men, if that makes sense. So there's like we're out of balance from my perspective. Those are really, really important factors. And I think that there's so much that can be done once you start to do that inner child healing work. You create that connection, you create it's kind of like opening a door. And just conversing or communing with your younger self. And once you start to do that, you'll find that it's like a wellspring. It's like so full of opportunities. And I believe that that's where your creative energy comes from. And anytime I work with clients, and when I do this for myself, I go back to, what does, 10-year-old Mikey want? What was he inspired by? What were the things that he was passionate about? And that's what gets me, that's what gets me going. It's like, oh, wow, I wanted to connect with, those elements of creativity or the innocence that I had as a child, and the fun or the opportunities and just the pleasures of life that I had. I think it's that level of innocence that gives you so much creativity or access to those creative powers.
Yeah. And one more thing about childlike demeanor or attitude is that I believe that's the path to enlightenment, or to remember that we're enlightened beings. It's not to become this serious, wise sage. Most of the people that I have seen in my life that I consider as enlightened, they are the most childlike. Not childish, but childlike. They laugh very easily. They don't take things seriously. I always recommend people to watch some of the interviews with the Dalai Lama. Yeah. And he is having so much fun, that guy.
Oh, he's like a big kid.
Right. And so I believe that in this path, it's just to go back to the original you. That maybe because when we were growing up, the adults around us were so fearful and so confused, they kind of shut him or her down, is to make sure that part of ourselves feels safe to express itself. And for me, that's enlightenment. So yeah, awesome. So carry on. Mm-hmm.
Definitely is. And then we talked about the hero's journey and the call to adventure. And so we've got Joseph Campbell on the screen here. And essentially, from my perspective, anytime somebody starts to proactively examine their lives, it's the beginning of the personal development path. And you're literally going off into the unknown. So the known elements of life, it's like, look around, you can see what most of your friends, your family are doing. It's the expected life path. And we talked about this in the last episode where, you go to college or you go to high school, you get good grades, you go to college or university, you get a career, then, you kind of fall into this relationship and you start a family and you have a house. And before you know it, like 30, 40 years have passed. And what do you have? It's kind of the unexamined life in many ways. And I'm not saying that there's anything wrong with that particular path. And most of us will probably go down that. But there's a difference of doing it with intentionality and versus doing it by default. And so I believe that the call to adventure comes, and it's the personal pain. So it usually comes with some sort of a loss. There's loss and opportunity at the same time. And there are people, I don't know, I've always liked to talk to older people and I ask them about their regrets or what they would do differently. And, maybe it's morbid for some people, but I look at this and I go, they're really close to death. And I think that's when you get really sincere, you get a lot of clarity about, well, I should have done this or I should have done that differently. And so one of the things that always stands out to me is the people that have regrets for not taking risks. And I actually look at it like this. The younger you are, the more risks you should take. Now, it doesn't mean take stupid risks, but it means take calculated risks. Like go to a different country, go live in a different place, go, study different things, do something that you never would have done because it maybe wasn't, not that it was like looked upon like bad or stupidly, or I don't know. But here's an example for me. Like, I'm 41 years old, and I've in the past year or so, I've really immersed myself in dance classes. And so I'm taking dance lessons with people that are mostly in their 20s and 30s, and I'm dancing around like a payaso, like a clown. And so, but it's this process, and I'm giving myself the time to fail and fail forward. But I remember, like, when I was in high school, that was unheard of. Like, it just I would have never done it. Like, it's
Right.
like from my culture, from the small little city that I grew up in, cultural real, factors. It just wasn't something that you would do. And so now at this day and age, I'm like immersing myself into dancing. And it's a part of, identifying like the kinesthetic blocks that I have, which is really, really interesting. So do things. The younger you are, the more risks you should take. Calculated risks that challenge you, risks that, I'm not saying go do stupid things like robbing a bank or, taking illicit drugs or there's so many different things that you could do out there that are stupid, but do things that you wouldn't have considered, or the things that scare you a little bit, even though they're safe. Like, for some people, they're terrified to leave their home. I think travel is one of the best ways to do that. Go out and explore a different culture, get to know, learn a different language, take on a hobby that challenges you. And
so that's the call to adventure right there.
It's a part of that. So in Joseph Campbell's model, the call to adventure comes through, usually through pain or loss. There's something that happens, there's a loss that happens, then it also presents this opportunity. And the next step in that is, if you take that step, you cross the boundary from known to unknown, then you'll get supernatural aid. That's that's like the universal promise. It's like, if you are willing to make that leap, then the gods will protect you.
It's true. It's true. I've seen that in my life. I'm sorry for interrupting, but that's something that every time I've been scared to death to do something, and I think about it, I get ready about it, and it's the process of jumping into the abyss.
Yep.
And every time I've done it, around the corner, something that I wasn't expecting, boom, I'm here to help you. And now in introspection, in the moment, it's almost like, what, okay, thank you. But in introspection, now you look back and you're like, how did that happen? Like, I would have never planned for that. But yeah, so when you say yes to the call to the universe, the universe responds to you.
Yeah, I have an example, and it happened when I was in my early 20s. So I had just left the seminary, and I was kind of at a loss in terms of what to do. I was, stepping away from Christianity as a religion, and I was taking some classes to finish my associate's degree, and I was going to transfer into a different university to finish a marketing degree. And the end of the quarter, the end of the semester was coming up, and some friends of mine, or one friend of mine, he had met this group, and they were going to go travel. They're going to go backpacking through South America for 6 months. And my friend's like, you know what, you should come. Because I've been to Mexico a few times. I had a great time and really liked it. And I was trying to learn Spanish. And my first reaction was, no. It was like, no, I don't have the money. Like, all these excuses came up. No, it's too dangerous, or, there's so many different excuses. And for me, it was really, in hindsight, I look at it, it was like the call to adventure. And obviously, like, your conscious mind will throw up the objections, and some of them are valid. But then beneath that, there was like this deeper question, like, well, why not? Why can't you do that? And I narrowed it down, and it was a financial thing for me. I didn't have the money. I was 20 years old, and something happened where I made the decision. I said, you know what? I'm really interested. I want to go. And that was it. It was kind of like I put my intention into the universe, and the money came in. It was incredible. It was like, a couple $100 here and there came in. I saved up some money here. I think I sold something, maybe a guitar or something. And, the money kind of came in, and I had enough. And that trip transformed my life. And it was that process of, if you look at something and you want to do it, but it frightens you, it could be a good thing to do. So then set your intention and go, okay, universe, I'm going to do it. Open the door. And I think that's what happens. So going back to the slides. So today I wanted to talk about the individual, and we have the shape of the monad here, and it's really, when we could look at this from the archetypal forms that numbers have, or the archetypal representation that numbers and shapes have, rather. And this is a complete form. It's one. There's no dissecting. There's no intersecting lines here. It's just one complete circle. And so, what is it that makes you different, you Paola, different than somebody else, another person, or a group of people?
What does it make me unique?
Or just
unique
different.
Or different?
Yeah.
Well, I do believe we're all unique in our own ways.
Mm-hmm.
When you put all the parts together, I believe that I have a pretty big heart. I believe that I'm a seeker, that I'm pretty courageous despite the fear. I am, I love to take courageous risks. Sometimes they've been a little bit stupid, but most of the time, so the other day I heard it in one thing I was listening to, say you will never regret to be brave. So I love that part of me that loves to take courageous acts, even though sometimes it's very, very scary and it goes against my what I know to be true, what I know to be familiar. So that's what I believe it makes me different from everyone. What else? Let me think about it. I love that I love communication, that I can communicate messages.
Mm-hmm.
I love that about myself. And the question is not what I love about myself, it's what will make me different. Yeah. And what makes me, I have a lot of appreciation for my body tempo, so I take care of it. Mm-hmm. I think it's very important to take care of my health.
Good. So the process, we are all individuals. And so, if you look at a group of people, you can't really say, well, that's a group versus another group, because there could be groups within groups. But ultimately, if you were to break it down, it all comes down to the individual. It's the smallest element, or the individual is the minority. And one of the things that my highest intention for this episode series is to bring out to create the resources that draws out of the individual the importance and the capacity to individuate. And so I wanted to read this part. It's a little bit of a longer quote, but I wanted to read it. It's from the book Jung and the Tarot, and it was written by Sally Nichols. And this book is a wealth of knowledge. If you can find a copy of it, the last I checked, it was totally sold out. But it's such an insightful book, and it uses the tarot, but not from a divination perspective, but from an archetypal perspective, in terms of understanding the psychology and the psychological elements that are happening behind the different cards in the deck, the major arcana. I'm not going to go too far into it because I'm not, exactly a pro on tarot, but it's fascinating. So. Okay. This quote is about the individuated individual. So this is the person who is self-aware. Whenever we meet such a person, he is usually indistinguishable at glance from others in the group. His overt behavior and dress may be in no way remarkable. He may be actively engaged in conversation, or he may be relatively quiet. But almost instantly, some indefinable quality in his way of being attracts us to him. It is as if everything about him, his clothes, his gestures, his way of sitting or standing, belongs to him. Nothing about him is superimposed. Everything he says or does appears to arise from his deepest center, so that even his most ordinary remark shines forth with new meaning. If he is his, too, seems to belong. It is a comfortable silence, both for him and for us. Often, Such a person in silence will seem more present and active than those who are participating in more overt ways, because he is in contact with his deepest self. Our deep self responds, so that sitting in silence with this kind of human being can open up new vistas of awareness. Being at home with himself, he is instantly at home with us, and we with him. We feel as if we have known him forever. The communication between us is so open and easy that we understand him, yet he puzzles us. On the one hand, he is the most unusual person we have ever met. And on the other, he is just like us. He is a paradox. And I believe that is the experience that people have when they have the opportunity to connect with somebody, to meet somebody who is individualizing. It's a process. It's going to be something that happens throughout the course of your life. But we've all met those kind of people that they just seem to completely be present in their bodies. They're completely, their identity is so ingrained so that, whatever they're doing, they could be moving or talking or whatever, working, but it just looks like that is who they are. And it's different from somebody else that's going through the motions or trying to be somebody else. There's no effort. It's just that centered self. Mm-hmm. And so that's a really powerful expression of what the individual can be.
I love that. And when you were reading, it just makes my heart feel expansive by reading about that, because it's something to aim for. Like I just describe myself as a seeker. And whenever I have met people like this in my life, I remember when I was living in Belgium as a younger girl, I was 17 years old. And I met a teacher in the school I was attending. In those 6 months, I was an exchange student. And I remember we went to Italy with him, and he would know everything about the architecture and the stories and all about it. And I remember listening to him, and he was speaking Dutch. He knew Spanish, so we would talk after, but he would speak Dutch. And I could stare at this man and being like, oh my God, he was probably about 70 years old. And I just felt so captivated by his presence. He was so magnetic. And I remember as a 17-year-old girl, I told him, I want to talk to you. I just want to speak to you more. And luckily he spoke Spanish. And one day he invited me to his house before I left, back to Costa Rica. And I remember we talked for 2 hours. And as a younger girl, I was just like, wow, what is it about him that is so captivating? And I know he was self-actualized. So he's done a lot of work in himself. And remembering, at this point, I'm remembering again, is coming to me, the memory, just thinking unconsciously, I want that for me. That's what I want. I want to be the center person. I want to, just be what I want the world to be, and without too many words. Because I feel like people that are too insisting upon their beliefs, and this is something I heard from Reverend Michael Beckwith, when you're trying to evangelize everyone about your beliefs, it's because you still don't believe it yourself. So you're trying to convince yourself by, push it onto people. But it's such a beautiful view of being that person that has integrated self-actualized person. And I don't think the work will ever end until we transition back to eternity. But I think you get to stages of your own consciousness, and it's just it makes me excited, and it gives me a lot of hope, that's the human potential if you do the work.
Yeah, definitely. I think that there are two ways, at least two ways of doing this. And we see this with masters. So people that are extremely good at what they do, or they've developed a skill set or a knowledge base, and they've done it for decades. I believe that often what comes with that is a degree of self-awareness. So there's a book. It's called The Book of Five Rings, and the guy that wrote it was Japanese. I can't Miyamoto. I'm blanking on his name, but anyways, he was rumored to be one of the best swordsmen in his time, in his era, in feudal Japan. So probably 300, 400 years ago. And when you read about this guy who had dedicated his life to killing people, to becoming very efficient with swords, he starts to make analogies like, the sword is like the pen, and he's an artist, and there's the way that he writes is beautiful, at least how it was translated into English. And you start to, at least when I was reading it, I perceived like this degree of insight that he had into the human nature, the human spirit. And he had, I believe that if you go that direction of becoming really good, so you could be a musician, a business person, entrepreneur, artist, whatever it is, a historian, like the individual that you were talking about that knew all this ancient history in Europe. If you go down that path, it causes a deeper sense of self-awareness. And I think that there's a part of that starts to work within you, as you start to go through, you know who you are. You find yourself by studying something in great detail. It forces you to better understand yourself. And there's another way to do that, though, and this is a way that Paola and I are presenting, is instead of waiting to receive the personal development benefits at the end of your lifetime or at the end of that mastery path, well, put the personal development process, start the path now, and watch what happens as you become a master in a certain area. I believe it's going to be much more powerful. So instead of it happening by accident or as a side effect, make personal development your primary focus.
Mm-hmm. And the amount of momentum that you gain is so incredible. I've seen it in my life or in the people that I have guided through my coaching sessions when you're a diligent student, you start gaining momentum. And before we started this podcast, I was sharing with Mike something personal, and I could see myself being so aware of everything that is going on in my subconscious mind. I know there's a lot of things that I'm not aware of, but what I have seen is the amount of momentum I've gained for showing up diligently every day with intention. I love that you use that word, with intentionality. My teacher says we live in a world with a lot of ADD, attentional deficit disorders, but more dangerous than ADD is having a lot of IDD, intentional deficit disorder. We just go about life with an unexamined life. Oh, I just go and do this, and this is the way my family's been. This is the way I was raised. This is the way I am. What can you do? You accept me or leave me. And we're just in that victim consciousness. But once we start being curious about our beliefs and examine everything and doing the work, the hero's journey, the amount of momentum you start gaining, and mostly at this time and age when there's so much information. I mean, look at us doing this podcast right now is so generous, and thank you for bringing all of that, that information that you're bringing to us, because this time, like, it's almost as if the entire world is raising the vibration. We're being upgraded, and we have all of these resources to examine our lives and to keep evolving. And yeah, for personal experience, I would say once you do this, you'll never regret it. It's pretty amazing. The outcomes is never only rainbows and butterflies and unicorns, but even on your darkest days, even on the days where things are not going the way you want, and when you have started the personal development path, you see this moment from a different perspective. You see this as being your boot camp, your personal development boot camp, your spiritual boot camp. And you just start dancing with life instead of struggling so much.
Yeah, exactly. Beautifully said. Beautifully said. Mm-hmm. So there's a couple more slides I wanted to share. And this is coming to the topic of, this was Carl Jung talking about the conscious and the unconscious, the rift. And you kind of talked about that just a second ago, the people that are suffering from IDD, the intentional avoidance of oneself. And it's an interesting topic because I'm certified as a hypnotherapist, and I utilize a lot of hypnosis with clients, with myself, whenever possible. And the common reaction is one of like questionable disbelief, like, really, that's weird, or that's different. And my response is usually, if you're not controlling your mind, who is? And there's nothing to be afraid of that's in your mind. I've even had that response from people, that they're afraid to experience hypnosis because they don't know what they're going to experience. And they're afraid that there's some sort of terrible experience or memory or alter ego lingering in their unconscious mind. And I look at that, and it's really, for me, it's predictive of the experiences that they have in life. And Carl Jung, summarized this in this quote. He says, "Today, humanity, as never before, is split into two apparently irreconcilable halves. The psychological rule says that when an inner situation is not made conscious, it happens outside as fate. That is to say, when the individual remains undivided and does not become conscious of his inner contradictions, the world must perforce act out the conflict and be torn into opposite halves." And I think that we see this, be blunt, I think we see this in politics. I think we see this in business, in society, in our culture, in religions. There's so much that's happening inside in terms of the individual, and then the unconscious projections outwards, and becoming recognizing yourself as an individual as part of the process of separating yourself from the group and group think and the collective. And I believe it to be the self-awareness path, the personal development path for me is, I couldn't say that it is this, but I believe it to be similar to enlightenment. And as I understand enlightenment, it's the ability to have an experience and at the same time objectively perceive that experience from perhaps a third person perspective. Like, you're watching yourself and you're making the choice based upon the highest and best intention and the ultimate outcome that you want to have in that experience. If that makes sense. Mm-hmm. It's kind of like coming to the crossroad in every single one of your emotional states and every single one of your decisions, and being able to choose. So kind of like, the Matrix.
Right.
Low speed. Yeah. And real life is passing around you, but you in your mind in split seconds, you're going, no, yes, no, yes, no, yes, no. And having it happen at a degree that's not on autopilot by default, but on autopilot by design.
I love it. There's another quote that I love by Carl Jung that says, until you make the unconscious conscious, the unconscious will rule your life, and you will call it fate.
Yeah.
And as you said, the path of, remember that we're enlightened beings is to remember all of those programs is not who we are, but is something that we have. We have a mind that it has been programmed, and it's very important for us in this path to be aware of what's in there and be the observer of the thinker thinking the thoughts. What are the things, how are our reactions? Just have that childlike curiosity. Oh, look at me, how I'm reacting in this moment, so that you can choose, because an enlightened being chooses.
Yeah.
When you're living an unexamined life, you react.
Exactly.
So it's that difference, and that's real freedom. That's real freedom to know that you have the power of choice, but that requires a great deal of awareness. And I've been studying Joe Dispenza, and he says we are the only being on the planet that has metacognition. Metacognition is your ability to see yourself thinking, to observe yourself thinking, and we can use this could be, a curse or a gift. A curse because metacognition is also about remembering memories of the past and replaying them over and over and over again. And then the brain is like, oh, I'm reliving all of these things every day, even though they're not happening in our reality. But metacognition also allows us to be the observer and to say, no, that's not me. That's just solve these things from the past. And then the more you do that, then what's the name of that, neuroplasticity come into place, which is the capacity that we have to rewire our brains, to take all of that conditioning from society, from the collective thinking, and then start wiring new connections that are more empowering.
Exactly.
So,
Yeah.
mm-hmm.
We are our own best and worst hypnotists. So we're constantly self-hypnotizing. And, it's
Mm-hmm.
that ability to pop up out of the trance that we're in and go, wait, I'm going to break that. I'm going to interrupt that process.
Yeah. Can I say something? You just reminded me of something that someone said. There was someone that I was in a seminar, in a personal development seminar, and they were in victim consciousness. This is a brainwash. I don't know. And then someone responded, but you've been brainwashed all of your life with all of these fearful thoughts. You already been brainwashed.
Yeah.
Why don't you just brainwash yourself, re-brainwash yourself with something that is positive? It's not going to hurt you. So let's call it, we're brainwashing ourselves with something that it's more empowering, more expanding. So in case, some people might say, oh, all that self-help, all that personal development, whatever is brainwashed. Well, the news is you've been brainwashed by the media. You've been brainwashed by, religion and dogma. So how about we do the same, but, on the other side where it's a little bit more empowering.
Yeah, perfectly said. And that's really we're taking those foundational steps. And that's really the highest intention here is to point out that you are an individual and you are part of the group. You are part of the greater collective. But at the same time, you're a separate entity, and you can think for yourself. And that's what we want you to do. And our goal is to provide resources that help you to do that and to become more self-aware. And it's an ongoing process. And I'm not saying that I'm, completely self-aware. I don't think Paola would say that she is, but we can see, the reasons for doing this. And the terminology here, I'm not quite sure about this. I was doing a little bit of research earlier. I don't know if the word is Vedantas. I'm not quite sure if that it's an Indian phrase that comes out of Hinduism. But I like the concept, and this is something that I heard Deepak Chopra talking about, or perhaps I read it in one of his books. So obviously it's not mine, but I thought it was really, really fascinating when he was talking about the 5 causes of suffering. And those 5 causes of not knowing who we are. The second cause is identifying with our ego or our self-image. The third cause is clinging to that which is transient and unreal. The fourth cause is recoiling in fear of that which is transient and unreal. And the fifth cause is the fear of death. And all of those fears are contained in the very first cause, which is not knowing who we are.
I love it. Mm-hmm.
So when we know who we are, when you define yourself as the individual, you start to chip away at the programming, the mass hypnosis, the mind control, the group thinking that is occurring, around the world, at a global level, at national levels, at cultural levels, within, even, small, within families, down to the family unit. Anytime that there's more than one person, you experience some form of social control or some sort of social interactions. And, knowing who you are, being able to clearly define your identity and have your purpose in life is a very powerful, and not only is it healing, but I believe it's motivating, because it gives you the ability to direct your energy, because we all have finite time during this lifetime. We don't know, when we'll take our last breath. It could be, today, tonight. It could be in 50 years. You just don't know. And so it really comes down to, from my perspective, what do you want to experience? And then what is something that you can leave behind? What is something that you can say or believe that you've done that makes the world a better place? And that's just mine. It's not required. You don't have to do that. So I wanted to
Can I say something about that?
Yeah,
About the slide before? So when you were speaking, I just thought about those people that are empathic, you know? I mean, we're all empathic in one way or another, but those people that are empathic, that they feel everything and they're just acquiring all this information, they're very sensitive to energies. And in the place that I work part-time, I remember one of the psychologists here, the psychiatrist, saying, make sure that you have healthy boundaries with self. Healthy boundaries with self is just knowing this part, you're an individual, and just check with yourself what's yours and what's from the collective, so that you don't get drained with all of that information. It just brought that up again for me, because most of the people that are looking at this podcast are probably in the process of seeking and doing their own personal development path. And you tend to be very empathic. You tend to feel everyone. And if we don't know this process of individuation, if we don't do that, then we're going to think that we're everyone's emotions and everyone's ideas. Yeah. Now, I can hear people saying, but isn't that true, Paola, that or Mike, that we're all one? And this is all one of us over here. And it's true. From a deeper level of consciousness, there's only one of us here. And that's a spiritual perspective. But I think in this process of personal development, it's very, very important that the first step that we do, and maybe I don't want to talk about steps 1, 2, and 3, but a good base is that we first discover who we really are, which is not our identity, is not our jobs, is not our age, is not our body, it's not even our program mind. We're more than that. And so when we know that we're not this, all of the, how did he call it in the 5 things? I would call it things that are not permanent, the impermanent things of life. He called it differently.
Transient and unreal.
Yeah. So when we are identifying our things, our lives, our selves, with all of those things that, tomorrow they can be gone. Like some, mostly women, we identified a lot with our bodies, and, the body ages, and then, oh my God, my life it's falling apart. Or with age, I see it around me. I know, some people are like, well, you don't know, you're young. But, even people my age, is that idea like, oh, we're our age, and at this time, in my life I'm getting old. People my age, I'm 33, and they're talking about getting old. So what are you talking about? You're not. But it's just a collective idea. Men identifying with money, and I'm not saying that women don't identify with their money or men don't identify with their bodies, but it's more predominant. And what happens, like 2008 economical crisis comes, and then all the money is out the window, and then you thought your identity was that. Then we suffer from that. So in this personal development path, you get to discover who you really are at an essence, things that nothing can take away from you, your age, other people, money, what you do, a career, is deeper than that. So I think this is a fundamental in the personal development path.
It's all going to go anyways. So it's, what would you do if you had no money? If you couldn't rely upon your beauty or your looks? It's all going to go. And I think that if you can get beyond that, there's a tremendous amount of energy that I think you have to create. So
right. And can I say something? There's a question that I heard yesterday and said, if money was not a thing and you didn't care what other people think of you, what would you do? Like, what would you do with your energy? If money and what other people thought of you was not a concern, what would you do?
I think most of us would be, I don't know if forced is the right word, but we would definitely have the opportunity to create. And I think that would be the calling. So because you're going to have to find, if you had no money, a good portion of the fun things and the good experiences, or the memorable experiences in life, do cost money. It to travel in a certain degree, it costs money. And so I think we all go back to that question of, how do I create something and how do I add value to others?
Mm-hmm.
And if you can add value to others, then typically the money comes.
Yeah, the law of circulation.
Yeah,
We can talk about it in another
absolutely.
podcast.
We're going to talk about those laws. So I wanted to share one last thing and then wrap up this call. So the homework assignment, our goal is to leave you with one action step per episode. And that is to apply what's called apophatic knowledge. And that's typically, it comes out of it's more of a religious concept, and it's defining something by what it's not. So using statements to define the character, the qualities, the abilities of yourself, using negative statements to define what you are not. And what happens when you start to go down this, because this is typically how our minds are oriented. And this brings me up to a point that I was going to share. It just crossed my mind. To limit negativity, limit social media. And we live in this day and age of people that are perpetually offended, and it's almost like they're looking for the next thing to be offended about. And I think it's so easy to just click share or like, and to just reverberate that stuff out there. And I'm guilty of it. I'm pretty sure that most of us are guilty of it in some way. But if you could leverage that, the energy that social media has. For example, I think a lot of people have Instagram. You can go through Instagram and scroll through, beautiful people doing fun things, having, these exotic vacations or whatever it is. And you can use that to define what you're not. And by defining what you're not, you get clarity about who you are.
Okay. Can you give an example of how do you do that? Like, how would you do for, like, what would be your list?
You could start with your physical characteristics. You could start with your income. You could start with your education level. You could start with your career. You could start with, you can look at it basically from the four major categories in life: health, wealth, relationships, and spirituality. You can define what you're not. Define what you're not in terms of your health. Define what you're not in terms of your relationships. Define what you're not in terms of your profession or your wealth.
Mm-hmm. But can you give an example of like a specific?
Sure. So I don't have hair. So for me, I don't have hair. I'm not, I don't have 5% body fat. Mm-hmm. You can start to go through those things and start to make this list of what you do have. And when you go through this, it's so much easier because our minds are geared towards, we sort more for the negatives when it comes to self-evaluation. It's so much easier to define. Because if I asked you to define, what are you? Who are you? You start to think, well, I don't know. I'm this, I'm that. And you can do it. It takes a while. Instead of making it so difficult, start to define yourself by all the things you don't like. Using the apophatic knowledge, that approach to say, well, I'm not this, I'm not that, I'm not this. And you get really clear about what it is that you like, what it is that's taking your attention, what it is that you feel attracted to.
Okay, so let me see if I understand, because I want to do this too.
Sure.
So you say, I don't have hair. Uh-huh. So then you say, I'm not my hair?
No. It's not in that sense.